Howdy, this is the Elly May Beverly Hillbillies. I'd like to remind you folks to be sure and watch every Wednesday night at 8:30 p.m.
Donna Douglas passed away over a decade ago, yet she still holds a secret many fans never fully understood. The beloved star of the Beverly Hillbillies lived a life far deeper than her famous role. Now, hidden truths about her journey are finally coming to light. What did she really leave behind that fans never noticed? The stunning truth revealed. On the first day of January in 2015, Donna Douglas passed away at the age of 82. She passed in Louisiana, the place where her life first began many decades earlier. Her passing was peaceful, and it marked the end of a long journey that had moved through fame, change, and personal reinvention. The cause of her death was pancreatic cancer, a serious illness that she had been dealing with quietly. For many fans around the world, the news felt deeply emotional because it reminded them that someone they had watched for years on television had finally left the world. At the time of her passing, many people immediately remembered her as the bright and lively character from a classic television series that once brought joy into countless homes. That image of her remained strong in public memory, almost as if she were still the same cheerful figure frozen in time on screen. But what often gets missed in that moment is the fuller reality of her life, especially the long path she walked after that fame had already begun to fade. This is where the deeper truth begins to form, not as a mystery or hidden scandal, but as a quiet understanding that her life was much more layered than most viewers ever saw. Long before her final day arrived, she had already made major changes in how she lived. She gradually stepped away from the loud center of Hollywood and began building a life that felt more personal and grounded. Instead of chasing new fame or trying to remain constantly visible in entertainment, she chose a path that led her toward writing, music, and spiritual expression. This decision did not happen suddenly. It developed over time as she reflected on what truly mattered to her beyond public attention. In her later years, she became more involved in activities that gave her peace rather than pressure. She spent time writing inspirational books and sharing messages that encourage others to think about faith, hope, and personal strength. She also expressed herself through gospel music, which became one of her most meaningful creative outlets. Through these choices, she was no longer defined only by acting roles or television appearances. Instead, she became someone who used her voice in a different way, one that was shaped by personal belief rather than performance scripts. Even though she moved away from Hollywood, she was never completely disconnected from the people who remembered her work. Fans continued to reach out to her over the years, and she often responded with appreciation. There was still a sense of connection between her and the audience who had grown up watching her. However, the relationship was no longer based on constant visibility. It became something softer, built on memory, respect, and long-lasting admiration rather than daily media presence. What makes her final years especially meaningful is the calmness with which she lived them. Miss Donna Douglas did not pursue dramatic attention or attempt to return to the peak of her earlier fame. Instead, she embraced a slower rhythm of life that allowed her to focus on personal peace. She enjoyed simple routines, quiet surroundings, and time spent in reflection. This change in lifestyle showed that her identity had grown beyond entertainment and into something more private and intentional. Her return to Louisiana in her later life added another layer of emotional depth to her journey. It was the same place where she was born, and coming back there gave her life a full circle feeling. The beginning and the end of her story were connected by geography, but also by a sense of belonging. It was as if she had traveled through the world of fame and eventually returned to a place that felt most like home. As she faced her illness, she did so away from public spectacle. Her battle with cancer was not widely displayed or turned into media attention. Instead, it remained a private experience shared with those closest to her. Even during this difficult time, she maintained the same quiet dignity that had shaped her later years. There was no public display of fear or regret, only the natural closing of a long life that had already moved through many chapters. When she passed away, the reaction from the public was filled with nostalgia and respect. Many people reflected not only on her television role, but also on the passage of time itself. Her death reminded audiences that the golden era of early television had produced stars who lived full lives beyond their screen characters. It also encouraged a renewed appreciation for her contribution to entertainment history. and especially the joy she brought through her most famous role. However, the deeper truth that emerges after her passing is not just about her career, but about her choices. She had the ability to remain in Hollywood's spotlight, but chose a different direction instead. She built a life that valued meaning over visibility, peace over pressure, and personal expression over constant performance. This aspect of her journey is what gives her story lasting emotional weight, because it reflects a decision many people can understand on a human level. Before she stepped away from fame, she had already experienced the height of public attention, becoming a household name through a role that defined a generation of television viewers. The next part of her journey moves backward in time, returning to her early beginnings, her childhood in Louisiana, and the path that eventually led her into Hollywood and into the role that changed everything about how the world saw her. From small-town girl to Hollywood star, Donna Douglas was born on September 26, 1932, in a small rural community called Pride in Louisiana. Life in that environment was simple and closely connected to family, tradition, and everyday community living. There was nothing glamorous about her surroundings, but there was a strong sense of grounding that shaped her personality from childhood. She grew up in a world where people valued hard work, respect, and closeness to nature, and these early experiences helped build the calm and steady character she would later carry into adulthood. From a young age, she showed signs that she stood out in quiet but noticeable ways. All people around her often described her as bright, confident, and naturally charming. She was not someone who waited for life to come to her. Instead, she carried a soft determination that pushed her to explore beyond her immediate surroundings. Even though she was raised in a small place, her imagination and ambition were not small at all. There was always a sense that she was meant for something beyond what she could see in her everyday environment. As she entered her teenage years, her appearance and personality began to open doors into local recognition. She eventually stepped into beauty pageants where she started gaining attention for both her looks and her confident presence. She earned titles in competitions within Baton Rouge and New Orleans, which became her first real experience of being seen by larger audiences. Now, these pageants were not just about winning crowns or titles. They became training grounds for her confidence, teaching her how to carry herself in public and how to remain composed under attention. These early experiences played a much bigger role than she may have realized at the time. They slowly prepared her for a future where cameras, audiences, and public appearances would become a regular part of her life. Through modeling opportunities that followed, she began to understand how presence and personality could open doors in ways she had never imagined while growing up in a quiet town. Each small step added more clarity to her path, even if she did not fully understand where it would lead yet. Her early ambition was not loud or aggressive, but it was consistent. She wanted more than what her surroundings could offer, and she was willing to work toward it patiently. This mindset pushed her toward modeling, and eventually toward opportunities in entertainment. Although Hollywood still felt far away at this stage, she was already moving in its direction through small but meaningful progress. Even as her opportunities grew, she never completely disconnected from her roots. The values she learned in Louisiana remained part of her identity. She carried her upbringing with her as she moved forward, and it influenced how she behaved in professional spaces later in life. This balance between ambition and humility became one of her strongest personal traits. What makes this early stage of her life especially important is how ordinary it was at the beginning. There were no sudden breakthroughs or dramatic discoveries. Instead, her journey was built step by step, through local recognition, small achievements, and gradual exposure to larger opportunities. It is this slow development that makes her later fame feel even more significant, because it was not rushed or accidental, but carefully built over time. As Donna Douglas moved closer to adulthood, the combination of confidence, beauty, and experience from pageants and modeling began to position her for something bigger. She was no longer just a girl from a small town. She was becoming someone who could step into larger creative spaces. This transition marked the beginning of her movement toward the entertainment industry, even though she had not yet fully entered it. This early foundation naturally leads into the next stage of her life, where small opportunities in modeling and performance begin to connect her to Hollywood itself. The role that changed everything. Her entry into Hollywood did not happen with loud celebration at first. Like many young hopefuls at the time, she moved through modeling work and small acting opportunities, slowly building her presence. She appeared in different productions, learning how the film and television world operated. These early steps were important because they shaped her understanding of performance and camera presence. She was not instantly a superstar. She was someone steadily finding her place in a very competitive industry. The real turning point came when she was chosen for a television role that would completely transform her life. Also, she became part of a popular comedy series centered on a rural family living a simple life after discovering wealth. In this show, she played a character full of innocence, charm, and natural beauty. Someone who loved animals, especially critters, and carried a playful personality that viewers found unforgettable. But this role quickly made her one of the most recognizable faces on television during that era. As the show grew in popularity, so did her image. People across different places began to associate her strongly with that one character. Children admired her, families enjoyed her presence on screen, and her smile became a defining part of the program's identity. She was no longer just a newcomer trying to find work. She had become a cultural figure through the reach of television. Her character brought warmth and humor into many homes, and that connection made her name spread widely. However, with that success came a hidden challenge that would shape her career path. Being strongly linked to one role made it difficult for her to be seen in other types of characters. Even though she had talent beyond that single personality, the entertainment industry often struggled to separate her from the image of the cheerful, country-style character she played. This situation created limits around the kinds of roles she was offered afterward. Even so, this period of her life was not just about limitation, it was also about achievement. She had reached a level of fame that many aspiring performers never experience. She had become part of television history, and her work continued to be remembered long after the show ended. Alongside this, she also appeared in other projects, including a film alongside one of the biggest music stars of that time, showing that her career had moments of variety even within typecasting pressure. What makes this stage important is the contrast between public success and private awareness. While audiences saw a joyful and stable screen presence, she was also beginning to understand the weight of being defined by one image. That awareness would later influence the decision she made about stepping away from Hollywood's center and choosing a different path for her life. The fame that once elevated her would soon become something she began to move away from. Walking away from Hollywood. After her major television success faded from its peak, she gradually began stepping away from the fast-moving entertainment industry. This was not a sudden disappearance, but a steady decision shaped by reflection and personal values. She understood that while fame had brought her recognition, it did not fully represent the kind of life she wanted to continue building. Over time, she began to redirect her energy toward areas that felt more personal and spiritually meaningful. One of the first major changes in her life was her decision to explore real estate work. This was very different from acting, but it gave her stability and a sense of normal living outside the entertainment spotlight. It also allowed her to interact with people in a more direct and grounded way, without the separation that often comes with celebrity status. Through this work, she experienced a lifestyle that was practical and steady. This is something that balanced the intensity she once knew in Hollywood. Alongside this new path, her spiritual life became more central. Faith was not just a background belief for her, it gradually became a guiding force in how she made decisions. She began using her voice in a different way, no longer just for acting roles, but for messages that encouraged and uplifted others. This shift led her into gospel music, where she recorded songs that reflected her beliefs and emotional experiences. Music became one of the strongest expressions of her inner life during this period. As she continued in this direction, she also developed a passion for writing. She created books that reflected her values, including inspirational works and stories aimed at younger readers. Writing gave her another way to communicate, but this time without scripts or characters. Instead, it allowed her to speak in her own voice, sharing lessons and ideas shaped by her personal journey. This creative outlet became an important part of her identity outside acting. Her public appearances also changed during this time. Instead of being part of large Hollywood productions, she began attending smaller gatherings, community events, and faith-based programs where she could speak more directly to people. In these settings, she was not viewed as a distant celebrity, but as someone sharing experiences and encouragement. These moments helped redefine how audiences connected with her, shifting from admiration of a character to appreciation of her real-life perspective. What makes this phase especially important is the intention behind her choices, because she was not forced out of the industry in a negative sense. Rather, she actively chose to step into a different lifestyle. Many fans often assume that most actors who leave Hollywood do so because their careers fade, but in her case, the decision was more personal and purposeful. She had already experienced what fame offered, and she began seeking something that felt more lasting and emotionally fulfilling. Even though she was no longer in mainstream television, she never completely disconnected from her audience. She still received fan letters and continued to acknowledge the people who remembered her work. However, she no longer lived under the constant pressure of being in the public eye every day. Instead, she built a quieter routine that allowed her to focus on personal growth, creativity, and spiritual reflection. During this time, yet she also embraced a simpler lifestyle. She spent more time in familiar environments, enjoyed gardening, and valued peaceful daily routines. These small details might seem ordinary, but they represented a significant change from the demanding schedules of Hollywood production. Her life became less about performance and more about presence, less about image and more about authenticity. This transformation also changed how people later interpreted her legacy. Some still remembered her, mainly through her television role, but others began to discover this quieter side of her life, where she was not just an actress, but also a writer, singer, and speaker. This dual identity created a more complete picture of who she truly was beyond the screen. As this part of her journey settles, it leads naturally into her later years, where this quieter lifestyle continued until the end of her life. A quiet but meaningful life. In Donna Douglas's later years, she settled into a calm lifestyle that stayed far away from the busy rhythm of Hollywood. She continued living in Louisiana, a place that always carried emotional meaning for her, because it represented where everything began. Being back in that environment gave her a sense of comfort and familiarity, as if her life had slowly come full circle. The noise of fame no longer surrounded her daily routine, and instead, she embraced quiet moments that allowed her to reflect and live at a slower pace. During this time, she remained active in ways that suited her personal beliefs and interests. She still engaged in writing, especially inspirational and family-friendly work, which allowed her to continue sharing thoughts without the pressure of performance or public expectation. She also maintained her connection to music, especially gospel singing, which had become one of her strongest forms of expression over the years. These activities were not about building a career anymore, but about staying connected to what gave her inner peace. Even though she was no longer appearing regularly on television, she did not become invisible to the world. Many fans still remembered her warmly and continued to reach out to her through letters and messages. She often responded in her own way, appreciating the fact that people still valued her work from earlier decades. This quiet exchange between her and her audience created a long-lasting bond that went beyond screens and roles. Her personality in these years was often described through simple but meaningful traits. She was known to be kind, approachable, and grounded, someone who preferred sincerity over attention. Instead of seeking recognition, she focused on living in a way that felt honest and comfortable to her. This approach to life showed that her identity had expanded far beyond the character that made her famous, and that she had built a personal world that was steady and peaceful. As time moved forward, her health gradually became a concern, which is a natural part of aging. She faced a serious illness in her final period, specifically pancreatic cancer. This condition is known for being very difficult, and she dealt with it privately and with dignity. Even during this stage, there was no dramatic public display. Instead, her final chapter remained consistent with the way she had chosen to live for many years, quietly and away from unnecessary attention. Despite her health challenges, she remained connected to her environment and the people close to her. She did not isolate herself completely from life, but continued to maintain a calm presence within her community. The way she handled this period reflected strength in a quiet form, not through public speeches or appearances, but through acceptance and peace in her personal surroundings. On the first day of January 2015, her life came to an end at the age of 82. She passed away peacefully in Louisiana, the same state where her journey had begun decades earlier. Her passing marked the closing of a long life that had moved through different stages, and from small-town beginnings to national fame and finally into a private, meaningful retirement. The moment of her death did not erase her presence in public memory. Instead, it added a reflective layer to how people viewed her entire journey. After her passing, many people looked back at her life with renewed attention. Most still remembered her as the cheerful television character who brought joy into homes, but others began to recognize the fuller picture of her life story. They saw someone who had experienced fame, stepped away from it, and built a second chapter that was entirely her own. This combination of public success and private fulfillment made her life feel more complete in a different way. Her final years also showed that stepping away from fame does not mean disappearing from meaning. Instead, she demonstrated that a person can choose a quieter path and still live a life filled with purpose, creativity, and connection. This understanding slowly became part of how her legacy was discussed, especially among those who admired not just her acting, but also her personal values. Her life was no longer just about what she did on screen or how she ended her days, but about the full arc of transformation from a young girl in Louisiana to a nationally loved actress, and finally to a woman who chose peace and simplicity over continued fame. The truth about her legacy, that fans often miss. Even after her passing in 2015, her presence never truly faded from public memory. For many people, she remains strongly connected to the cheerful and lively character she once played on television. Anya, a role that continues to appear in reruns and old recordings. Each time those episodes are watched, a version of her energy returns to the screen, reminding audiences of a simpler entertainment era filled with family-friendly storytelling. This ongoing visibility keeps her name alive across generations, who may never have met her personally, but still feel familiar with her work. However, as time has passed, a deeper understanding of her life has slowly grown beyond that single-screen identity. People have begun to recognize that her journey did not stop when the camera stopped rolling. Instead, she moved into another chapter that was less visible but equally important. In that quieter phase, she focused on writing, music, faith-based expression, and personal connection. These parts of her life are now seen as essential pieces of who she really was, not just an extension of her fame, but a reflection of her inner values. Her legacy is also shaped by the idea of reinvention. She demonstrated that a person does not have to remain fixed in one identity forever. Even after achieving major recognition, she made the decision to step into a different kind of life that matched her personal beliefs and emotional needs. This decision stands out because it shows independence of thought, where success in one field did not prevent her from exploring other paths that felt more meaningful to her. In this way, her life becomes more than just a Hollywood memory. It becomes an example of how individuals can shift direction even after reaching public success. She did not allow fame to define the limits of her future. Instead, she allowed herself to evolve, to explore faith, creativity, and service in ways that were not dependent on cameras or scripts. This perspective adds depth to how she is remembered, especially by those who see her story as more than entertainment history. Her work as a writer and singer also continues to contribute to her legacy. Through books and gospel music, she expressed parts of herself that audiences could not always see on screen. These creative efforts showed a different dimension of her personality, one that focused more on encouragement, reflection, and emotional connection. While these works may not have reached the same level of fame as her television role, they remain meaningful in understanding her full identity. Another important part of her remembrance comes from the way she treated people during her life. Many who encountered her in personal or professional settings often described her as warm, approachable, and sincere. She carried a sense of humility that remained even after experiencing widespread recognition. This grounded personality became part of how she is spoken about today, not just as a performer, but as a genuine human being who valued kindness and simplicity. Her return to Louisiana in her later years also adds emotional weight to her legacy. It symbolizes a return to origins, a quiet closing of a long journey that began in a small community and expanded into national fame before returning to peace. This circular path gives her life a sense of completeness, as if every stage naturally led into the next, until it finally came back to where it all began. Even now, Discussions about her life often highlight this balance between fame and personal choice. Some remember her as a television icon, while others focus more on her decision to step away and live differently. Together, these views create a more complete understanding of who she was, showing that her identity cannot be reduced to a single role or moment in time. As years continue to pass, her story remains relevant because it speaks to something universal. It reflects the idea that life can change direction, that success can take many forms, and that personal peace can sometimes matter more than public recognition. This message is what keeps her memory alive in a meaningful way, especially for those who discover her story long after her passing. However, as her journey is remembered not only for what she achieved on screen, but for how she chose to live beyond it. She moved through different stages of life with quiet determination, from small beginnings to widespread fame, and finally into a peaceful private existence. Each stage carried its own lessons, and together they formed a complete picture of a life that was both visible and deeply personal. She was someone who experienced change, made personal choices, and built a life that extended far beyond public attention. Her legacy continues not because she remained in the spotlight, but because she lived a full journey that many still find meaningful today.